Right, exactly.
Good afternoon, and welcome everyone to the Brookings Institution. That is, those of you who are with us here in person, those who are on the live stream. I think we have about 700 people watching on a live stream, and then those who may be watching on C-SPAN, too. I am John Vallant. I'm the director of the Brown Center on Education Policy here at Brookings, and we are delighted at the Brown Center to co-host this event with our friends in the Center for Universal Education, also here at Brookings. And we're here today to talk about two kind of big, vexing topics in education right now, one being student disengagement and the other being chronic absenteeism. And those are two problems that are related in a lot of ways, and they're overlapping in a lot of ways, but they're not perfectly overlapping. And so student disengagement leads to a whole lot of problems beyond just kids missing school, and kids miss school for a whole lot of reasons other than just being disengaged. And part of what we're here to do today is to talk about what that relationship is and what it isn't, and how do we start thinking about chronic absenteeism and thinking about getting students more engaged in school. When we're talking about student disengagement, we're going to be anchored by a new report from my colleague Rebecca Winthrop and her collaborators at Transcend Education, where they've identified some interesting differences, among other things, between what 10th graders say about how engaged they are in education and what the parents of those 10th graders think their 10th graders believe about how engaged they are in education. And we're going to draw that into a conversation with a panel that's going to join me in just a second here. I'll do quick introductions so they can jump right in. We'll have Jenny Anderson moderating the discussion. She's going to be on that far side over there. Jenny is a journalist and the co-author of a new book, The Disengaged Teen, Helping Kids Learn Better, Feel Better, and Live Better. Jenny's co-author, Rebecca Winthrop, will be sitting right next to Jenny. And Rebecca is a senior fellow here at Brookings and the director of the Center for Universal Education. Next to Rebecca, we'll have Sonia Santelices, who's been the CEO of Baltimore City Public Schools for almost a decade now at this point. And we have Janae Henry Wood, who's the Chief Learning Officer at Transcend and an author herself of a recent book on how communities can design thriving learning environments. And then we'll have Nat Malkus, who's a senior fellow at the American Institute, the American Enterprise Institute just down the street. And Nat has been doing yeoman's work in collecting data on student absences and analyzing those data. And I think we're going to see actually some of those data in a few minutes here. A couple of quick housekeeping notes before I hand off to Jenny. First, after we hear from the panelists, we're going to have, I think, a good 15 to 20 minutes of audience Q&A. If you're here, we'll have microphones around. If you're not here but you're watching us live, please feel free to either email your questions to events@brookings.edu, and we'll be checking that email account, or on X using #disengagementgap. I guess if you're here, you could also tweet us using #disengagementgap if we have introverts in the room. And then second, for those of you here in person, right after the panel, we'll have a reception, and there will be copies of Jenny and Rebecca's book available, and I think you would have a couple of authors very happy to sign that copy for you. So thank you all for coming, and I'm going to hand off to Jenny.
All right. Why don't you all join me?
Yes, we are.
Great.
We are.
Sorry.
We weren't sure.
I thought she was going to be at the podium. Thank you all so much for being here. I am really looking forward to this conversation. The way we're going to architect this is we're going to get into 4 issues. We're going to frame the problem, the issue, the challenge, the scope of the problem. What are we rebounding from? We're going to look at what's causing it. Spoiler alert, it was not just COVID. We're going to look at strategies that are working and not working, to borrow some of Janae's language, and we're going to leave those in the heap pile of history. What can we leave in the heap pile of history? And then we want to do some blue sky thinking, really think outside the box and dream big about if we could re-architect the system and really get rid of some of the big obstacles that are holding us back, what would it look like? So Nat, can you kick us off and sort of scope this problem for us? What are we looking at? Where are we coming from? Where are we now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad to be here at the American Enterprise Institute. I've been tracking sort of the pandemic fallout since the pandemic began, and this is sort of the tail end of that. And I will admit that I was hoping to track chronic absenteeism as sort of an antidote at cocktail parties where I was always the stinker with the bad news, because I was looking to have this, we were going to turn this chronic absenteeism problem back around quickly, but I'm still the stinker at the cocktail party. So we have some time to go. On the chronic absenteeism first, just on the basics, chronic absenteeism is the percentage of K-12 students who miss 10% of the school year for any reason. And all those things are important. The reason that it's different from truancy, it's just how much have you missed school at all? And the reason that it's important to gather that is because school is good. School benefits students, and when they miss a lot of it, they miss out on some of those benefits. We know that chronic absenteeism is an important indicator because the students that meet it are missing about 18 days a year. That's about at least one day every couple of weeks. It can be bunched up or spread out, but we know that on average it's associated with some bad effects. So if you're chronically absent in the younger years, you're much less likely to read on time at grade 3. In middle school, you're more likely to struggle academically. In high school, it's one of the greatest predictors of whether you're going to graduate on time. It is indicative. It is some of the soft skills that take you through either college or the workforce. I mean, if you've heard of people or people say, well, half of life is showing up. That really is part of this this deal. I'll add consistently to it. So the Return to Learn Tracker, we have data on there. It was updated yesterday. Again, every time a state drops a new data file with district-level chronic absenteeism data, we fold it in. And we've got some here. It's not showing up beautifully because I didn't put enough contrast here, but just to give you a sense of the scope of the problem. Pre-pandemic, I think the most reliable data that we have is in 2018 and 19. That's data for 50 states and was right around 15%, and it's important to understand that it was incredibly stable across those 2 years. In 2020, we lost the last several months of that school year, so you can kind of doubt it. 21, we had closures. 22, we had astoundingly high chronic absenteeism. It jumped about 90%. It jumped across the board. I think it's an important thing to just tag on here. I spent a lot of time and got into this business tracking school closures, and those did matter for this, but just on the margin. This isn't school closures that caused chronic absenteeism. It is the pandemic that caused this jump. I'll give you a little bit of caution for the last 2 school years. We still don't have all the data from all the states, including for 2023. I'm looking at you, Texas. So I want to say that these are provisional numbers, but the arc is not going in the direction that we need it to. It's not coming down fast enough. And there's 2 other things that I want to say before I pitch it back, and that there's 2 ideas that we need to hold in our hands at the same time to understand what happened. And you can look at these things at the Return to Learn Tracker, but if you look at high achievement districts and low poverty districts, which are 2 separate things, but they overlap a lot, before the pandemic and after the pandemic, they had lower chronic absenteeism than their low achieving and or high poverty counterparts. That is true, okay? So disadvantaged districts have more chronic absenteeism. Over the pandemic, the percentage increase, how much they increased, was right at 90% for both of them. So the amount of change is incredibly widespread. It's sort of one thing that happened in a way that we rarely see in education data that affects sort of across the board. And I think it's important, I think you can sort of see it through here, that we had some stable behaviors as far as attendance, that during the pandemic, we had a lot of things change during the pandemic, and this is one of them, those stable behaviors. They unfroze, and I think they're still sort of moving around, and I think the question that we have to, that keeps me up at night is, where are we going to sort of refreeze? Where are these habits going to settle into a new normal? And where it's looking like it's settling with these provisional numbers should have us all worried.
Thanks a lot for framing that. Dr. Santelises, can you take us through your own district, Baltimore County? What was your normal? Where are you now? And maybe dip into Nat's question there. Are you fearful that this is a new normal?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. So first, just so that I don't get in trouble, back in my home district, it's actually Baltimore City, not Baltimore County. And in Maryland, those of you in Maryland know that's a big deal.
Apologies for that.
That's okay.
Blame me. My fault.
That's okay. But I think to Nat's point, Baltimore City had, like a number of urban school districts or districts that serve large numbers of young people coming from high poverty neighborhoods, had always had a challenge and a focus on chronic absenteeism. But similar to the pattern that Nat outlined, we went from hovering around 30%, which isn't great, right? That we started around a third of students not coming, and we got up close to 70%. I have other urban colleagues who got actually over 70%, closer to 3/4 of young people coming out of the pandemic being chronically absent. In Baltimore City, what that means is we know that young people who are not chronically absent are twice as likely to be proficient in their reading and language skills. We know that young people that are not chronically absent are 3 times as likely to be proficient in mathematics. And so when we use the term, as Matt did, that showing up actually counts, it does count, right? So even controlling for everything else, just being at school and coming regularly means you are more likely to be on grade level. At the earlier end, what that looks like in Baltimore City is that even at our youngest grade levels, a lot of times folks think of chronic absenteeism or young people missing schools as a high school issue. Yeah. Well, actually in Baltimore City, our pre-K and K students have some of the highest chronic absentee rates in our entire, school district. So what that means when we look at our data is that a pre-K student who is not chronically absent, who attends at least, say, 90% of the time, is probably, and I think it's close to 15 times more likely to not only score higher on the kindergarten readiness assessment that we have, but more likely to be on grade level at grade 3. So it's not as if this is a one-time impact. It actually has impact over the trajectory of a young person's career. And as we went through the pandemic in Baltimore City, we have been watching that number go down. And this year, and special for today, I made sure I looked at some of where our data points are. We are now just in the midst of this school year, again, to the point made earlier, just now this year on track to be back where we were in terms of chronic absenteeism before the pandemic. But that is still, right, close to or just over a third of young people. So this question of what do we need to be adjusting, what needs to happen in order to get more young people going to school regularly is a long-term issue. It's not a one-year thing, come back from the pandemic, we fix it, and then move on. It really does have real on-the-ground implications for teaching and learning and, frankly, life outcomes.
And what I'm hearing is that obviously if you have pre-K and K, you've got a big spike there, and you have a big spike in teens, we're going to have extraordinarily different strategies in what we need to tackle this, because that's just, very different. Nat, did you want to add anything on that?
Well, it's a great point. Oftentimes, we'll talk about the grade distribution, sort of like the Nike symbol, right? So in pre-K and K, it's kind of high, and then it definitely dips down, especially by second and third grade, and then it starts to rise up through high school, and you'll see that. The other thing to note about the change during the pandemic was imagine the Nike swoosh, and now imagine that someone jumps. That's how it happened. It wasn't like, well, it went up in high school, but not in kindergarten. The entire thing, the entire distribution lifted. So we really did see it spread out. But it's certainly higher both at the very low end and up through high school.
So thank you for ruining the Nike swoosh for me. That was always aspirational. Now it's going to forever be taken. All right, let's get into what's driving it. Janae, I'd love to turn to you. Dive into this report. You guys had some incredible findings in the report. Talk us through what you found out about students. What are students saying about their experience of school, and how do you think that relates to this issue of chronic absenteeism?
Great, thanks so much. And Nat, you're underselling yourself, because with the Nike swoosh and everything, great cocktail guess. Underselling yourself, ruining brands, one story at a time. I'm kidding. So one of the things that is often the second, third, fourth, or fifth thing on the agenda is often to ask young people, how is school? So when we see this big headline, chronic absenteeism, we often aren't thinking, well, what's actually going on with the kids? We'll go to lots of different solutions. But when you ask kids, which we have done in partnership with Brookings at Transcend, when you ask kids what is going on, my goodness, will they tell you and give you a breadth of information. So in partnership with Brookings and at Transcend, we have the Leap Student Voice Survey, where we ask students along I don't know if you guys can hear me, sorry about that. We ask students along a range of dimensions. Do you feel that you can make your own decisions in school? Does your opinion matter? together? How much time do you spend formulating your own opinion? Do you get to partner with people that you want to work with in school? Do you get to choose some of your projects? Just a range of different questions that give us an understanding about something that's really important, which are the experiences that young people are having. Often when we talk about school, we primarily focus on what are the outcomes that kids are achieving, but we're not thinking about what are the experiences that are enabling those outcomes. And experiences are the learning activities, the habits, the ways of being of school. When you ask young people, how is school going? They will tell you, I'm not actually engaging in things that are going to help me today, tomorrow, or in the future. I'm really bored. And I don't really see a purpose for being here. So kids will tell you when you ask them what in the world is going on. In the report, I found it so helpful to think about student engagement along some sort of modes of engagement. We've got students that are at, and Rebecca, let me know if you wanted to talk about this, but we've got students that are really in that explore mode. That's a small percentage of students who are experiencing school in ways where they are able to ask questions, they're able to make decisions about how they learn, about how they spend their time. Then we've got a really big chunk of students, y'all, who are in the achiever. So these are students who we might describe as, I might be engaged a bit cognitively in school. I do what I'm told. I'm not a behavior challenge. I might get my homework in. I'm achieving. Those are students, generally speaking, where if they're getting A's, the system says they're doing great. We've got on the tail end of that, students who might be in a very different mode, where they are getting very disengaged. They might be passive, they might be cognitively disengaged, emotionally disengaged, and that, while it's not a perfect overlap, is certainly one of those drivers for chronic absenteeism. So there's really a relationship between the experiences that young people are having and the kinds of modes of engagement that they can get in. And if we can understand those two things as being wed, that gets us to a place where we can be thinking about solutions holistically once we understand what's driving it.
And one of the most startling stats to me in that report is that less than 4% of kids in middle and high school get the chance to kind of feel like they're really engaged, agentically engaged in their learning. And so it really is not happening at the rates that we need. Rebecca, tell me about the parent angle on this report. Do parents have any idea how engaged their kids are in learning? And help me tie this to the absenteeism. Let's bring it back to how related do we think this is to not showing up?
So I'm going to give you guys a few stats from the report. You can find more details there, but I was really, really surprised when, together with my co-authors, David Nitkin, David, where are you? And Yusuf Shukri, my colleagues from Transcend, and we co-authored this report, how stark the difference was between what students said, what you just talked about, Janae, and what parents thought their kids' experiences were. So when parents have a good sense of what's going on with their kids when they're younger. So we tracked kids 3rd through 12th grade, and 3rd grade, 75% of kids say, I love school, when you ask them that. And by the time you get to 10th grade, it's 25% of kids, which to me is perhaps the saddest statistic of the entire research enterprise. And I think it's sad for many reasons. One, how could we kill the love of school for something that kids are so naturally born to do, which is to learn? And two, this is not a national priority. People don't really care that kids don't like school. I think that's awful, actually. We should care that kids don't like school, because how kids feel about school, all the research bears this out, has a huge bearing on if they show up at school, think about absenteeism, but also how they do at school and how they learn. So parents, they know in 3rd grade, they're more or less on par with, does your kid love school? Yeah, more or less they know. And they do know that kids love school less as they go on, but they think it just goes down a little bit. So by 10th grade, let's see, by 10th grade, 65% of parents say, parents of 10th graders say, yeah, my kids love school versus only 26%. Then you have about 29% of 10th graders saying they're interested in what they learn. And parents of 10th graders say 71% say, oh yeah, my kids are interested in what they learn. That's a huge, these are 40% percentage point gaps here. Let's see, 33% of 10th graders say they get to develop their own ideas in school. Just think about that for a moment. Only a third of kids say they get to, in high school, say they get to develop their own ideas. What's the point of school if they don't get to develop their own ideas? But you've got 69% of parents saying that they do. And to me, this shows that parents are really in the dark, and it's not their fault. It's because parents are going off of the feedback loops that schools are giving them, which is grades. And that gets us to the point that grades really only tells a piece of the story. You do see absolutely grades dipping when things are a big problem. You can talk a lot more about this, but it doesn't pick up the type of invisible disengagement that you see when kids, that Janae was talking about, when kids are in passenger mode, where they are showing up, they're doing the bare minimum, but they are not emotionally engaged, they're not cognitively engaged, they're not agentically engaged. And that can go, we know the research bears this out, that can go on for a long while, but if it lasts too long, kids eventually start looking for other things to entertain themselves. And that's where you start, to me, chronic absenteeism is a symptom of disengagement.
Right. I want you to just dig in on one point, which is parents can't help a problem that they can't see. And so one thing you're saying here is they're not seeing a big problem, so that is a problem. Tell us just briefly before we move on to strategies, because I want to get to that. What happens when parents and schools are on the same page and working together to support student engagement? What does the research say?
So my colleague Emily Morris and I, who is here in the audience, we have been leading a global network on family school community engagement and have done lots of investigation of this topic. And we know that when parents and teachers and school leaders have strong relational trust, so if they're rowing in the same direction, they're communicating, they're talking about things that they all care about, those schools are 10 times more likely to be improving against achievement outcomes, literacy, numeracy, alongside attendance and alongside mental health outcomes and teacher retention numbers. So we really want to make sure that we're bringing parents into this equation.
So I think this is a really nice sort of segue into the strategies, which clearly are going to get into relationships, the relationships that parents have to school, students have to school, teachers have to school. So Dr. Santelises, I'd love to come to you. Strategies. What is working? What have you tried? What's not working? What is working?
No, and I think that that's the heart of the issue. And I do want to build off of this theme of relationships, because what we are seeing, just to verify what you're saying, is that the schools that have the most cohesive cultures, that have the most fluid school climates, meaning there's not tons of disruption, there's not lots of chaos, are actually the ones that are making the most rapid progress along many continuum. And I think that that's an important piece, that yes, it's chronic absenteeism, but it's also achievement. And so when we look at some of the characteristics of things that are working, for us, a lot of the focus that's been most successful is, one, making sure we're differentiating strategy. So on our pre-K focus, a lot of what we've seen is that, frankly, our community engagement specialists who come around, look at wraparound services, particularly in districts that have large numbers of young people coming from poverty. One of the things that we see is parents, in large part, aren't just always sitting home because of one thing, right? You don't not bring your child to school for one reason. And the ability to connect on things like employment, on healthcare, on housing assistance, things that you can't expect a third grade teacher to do, but that this community engagement specialist actually does have time to do, make a difference. It also begins to build relationships with home and families where you can have some honest discussions about, actually, it is important to be in school every day. And we don't often like to talk about it, but post pandemic, what we have seen is a rise in not only young people, but in families saying, so does it really matter if we're in school every day? And so how do we have those conversations as a larger community around the importance of being in school every day? But in order for those conversations to stick, at least in the community that I serve, relationship is what gives you the right to be able to say, actually, when it's raining is not a great time to say, let's just stay home today, right? Or pre-K is not just a play group. It's actually laying the foundation for some newfangled term called executive functioning, right? Which allows kids to, develop processes. So I think what we're seeing in the early grades is that kind of partnership. In the upper grades, it is listening to young people. Yeah. And one of the things they told us, particularly in places like Baltimore City, is the ability to generate income, to know that you can get a job, is going to pull young people away from something that they don't see the connection. And so one of my favorite examples of this is in one of our high schools. I met a young man who is in one of our career tech programs where through the construction program, they're actually renovating an abandoned property, which we have too many of in Baltimore City, and it's right across the street from the high school. And the young man's eyes lit up, right, as he was showing me through his work in carpentry in this school. And he was very frank about kind of the exchange that was occurring. Like, yeah, I'm more likely to come in the morning to get through that math class, to get through that history class, because I know I get to come across the street and work on this house. And that's what gives me joy. And I think when we talk about relevancy, we forget that for young people, being part of a community is belonging. It does not mean that you have to have a hands-on activity in the middle of calculus. What it really means is that do I have adults working together, right, who are able to channel, right, what I kind of feel like is important with this piece called school, and a community will do it. And this young man was basically telling me, no, I actually don't feel that different about algebra. I'm not sure I'm thrilled about it, but you know what? Getting to algebra allows me to go do what I really love doing, and I get credit for it, right? It's not just extra, I get credit for it. And I think we've got to look at what time counts as learning time. And if it is only seat time, if it is only occurring at one point in a traditional school day, we have a generation of adolescents who have now tasted what it looks like to be freed from, right, the encumbrances. And, that deal with both families and young people looks very different now. And I think that's part of what we're seeing, is where we can make those connections in tangible ways. Yes, relationships, but relationships that make sense in the daily reality of families and young people.
Sonia, I want to just jump in a little bit on that, because I'm going to mix some metaphors here, but I think they make sense. I think we both have a problem with sort of the throw and catch of this, and a chicken and the egg problem at the same time. And one of these is that we have a lot of work to do on the engagement front, I think particularly in the high school. So that's sort of the catching part. We want to make sure that we can receive children back more regularly so they're welcome after this sort of pandemic disengagement. It's much harder to do because we have a lot of kids who are already more disengaged, as evidenced by the chronic absenteeism. And you mentioned we need to be able to have tough conversations with parents, because part of this is, well, we need to make the environment more engaging. And that is true, but if we have some kids who are disengaged and we can't talk about what's sometimes sort of taboo, we need families to pitch in and push their kids to engage with school, then I think we're only dealing with half the problem. And I don't think that we're going to fix this problem until we work on both the catch and the throw. And that's also a chicken and the egg thing. If they're not already in, then we're already kind of working backwards. That's pretty tough. It's pretty tough sledding out there.
And let me build on that metaphor.
I wanted to come to you,
I'm
Jeanette.
sorry, Jenny. We're just taking on the joke.
No.
Go ahead.
No.
Sorry, Jenny.
I wanted to be an animated panel, but I also did really want to come to you. You guys do Yeah, incredible sort of research, and I just want to frame this for everybody here. You do research and development for schools, community-led design. You get in there, you listen to communities, you listen to students.
Yes.
And a lot of what you hear is about what we're hearing Dr. Santelises say, which is relevance. It's about experience. It is about engaging experiences, and it is very much about trust. So I want you to jump in here and tell us maybe why this telling parents to show up can be tricky. What's the historical context here? And what's the opportunity?
Great. I'm going to do that through 3 other points, but I promise I'm going to get there.
You telling me you're not going to answer my question?
No, she's going to get an answer, and everybody in the audience, raise your hand if I get the answer. So let me put these 2 things in context. What did you say? Throw, pull, catch?
Yeah, the throw and catch.
Throw and
yes.
catch, brilliant. So think of throw and catch. Now let's think about the field in which throwing and catching happens, because the field is the thing that we are focused on that we don't often talk about. We don't talk about the field in which the ball game is happening. So with my colleagues at Transcend, with David here in the audience, what we think a lot about you all is school design. What is the actual thing that we are asking, that we are pushing, that we are galvanizing communities to come to? If we want them to come, the thing that we want them to come to has got to be worth coming to. So there's a couple of different ways to think about this. Anyone who has worked in schools know that we have to often walk and chew gum at the same time. We can't shut the doors and R&D and make a new school and make it all perfect because we've got to teach young people. So we need these strategies. We need to also be telling parents, hey, yeah, rain, not an excuse. You got to bring your kid to school. They need to learn to read. We got to do all of that. But then we've also got to think about the actual design and structure of school. So let me talk about what I mean by that. All of you right now, I can kind of see you. You're looking down at phones. You're looking at chairs, right? The thing that the phone, that your chair has in common is that it is a designed experience. And oftentimes we take for granted that school itself is a designed experience. We sort of think, oh, it just kind of dropped down by virtue of natural law. And now we wake up and kids go to the bus and they get there and they start at 7:30 and end at 4. And then they work together in age-batched groups. They get assessed at the same time. And that's just normal. But the truth of the matter is that structure was very, very helpful for a certain time. It got lots of people in school. It got lots of basic literacy, really, really, really important. And those things really matter. So I definitely don't want to denigrate or downplay that. But that structure, that design is for a time that doesn't quite exist anymore. We're not in factories. We're not doing a lot of field work. Young people are going into jobs and professions that we can't even dream of today. And school really does need to be designed in ways that are going to enable them to learn in ways that are relevant. I could have used hands-on calculus. I will be honest, that would have kept me engaged. But I see your point. They need to be involved in ways that are deeply relevant. So what we think about is this concept of, well, how exactly do you go around? How do you do that? And so I want to tell a story of a high school that is in North Dakota. So we work all across the country, all different governance models. And there is a school district called the Northern Cass School District. It is in the prairies of North Dakota. And in that community, something profoundly special is happening. The school leader there had a group of seniors. And these seniors were under credit because they were what? Disengaged and chronically absent. Under credit, they weren't going to graduate. This was in about February of their senior year. And in North Dakota, they're in a state where they had a little bit of freedom. They had some context to make some different decisions about how learning could happen. Through work with Transcend, through work with knowledge work, through borrowing and adapting practices that have been proven and tested elsewhere, they came up with a model of learning called the studio model. This studio model allowed young people and teachers to come up with 8-week-long, effectively independent studies that were interdisciplinary. It was mixing math, social studies, history. There was one young person who was a senior. He said, you know what? English class was a great nap. That's what he said when I interviewed him. He said, English class was a great nap to me. I don't know who Holden is. I don't know what A Catcher in the Rye is. Like, I got a good nap. He let me know that. He was very clear about that. The thing that kept him in school, that got him through, was the studio model in which he got to blacksmith and learned to make horseshoes for his family farm, and learned to make coat racks, and learned to make all of these different types of things that the farmers in his community needs. So he thought, that's really cool. I want to do that. And you're telling me I can get about $150, $200 or more doing some of my blacksmithing work? That's incredible. And you're telling me that if I get a trade here, that I could be making even more than that, even more than if I were to leave school tomorrow? This studio, this new structure, this 8-week structure, where this young person got to ask, what am I good at? Where do I want to go? What do I want to do? What do I want to try? We often lose the fact that school is a place for practice and trying, and we've treated it as a place where you're on performance. It's not just practicing and trying. These studios allow for young people to practice and try new things. So get into blacksmithing. He then decided, yeah, I'm going to go get a trade. That was very different. This was a 15-year-old who was saying, I could go work anywhere and work for a wage kind of under the table. I don't need to stay in school. This is not helpful. There are so many stories in the Northern Cass District that are like that because they decided to say, we need to do school differently. We need to do high school differently. So instead of our kids getting off the bus and from 8:30 to 3:30, they're doing the standard thing, let's switch this thing up. Let's design a model that is going to actually enable deeper customization, to your point about differentiation, that's going to enable young people to make choices for themselves. And what we're seeing is that their attendance is now at 99%. And, they're a small district, so they weren't getting as chronic absentee, but they were having students that were severely under credit. This year, they have none of that. And they came up with this model, with this approach to solve a real tangible problem that was in front of them, which was students who couldn't graduate because they had been absent so much. So sometimes we have to think about the design and the field by which we are throwing and catching, because that, I think, is one of the real missing pieces. And we've got to do that, complicated for us, but we've got to do that at the same time that we're doing the strategies that Dr. Sangelis is talking about.
So we've got throwing, we've got catching, and we've got the field. So we're going to move to the spectators, which are the parents. I'm going to come to Rebecca because what I really want to dig into, and I think you're chomping at the bit to talk about it, is what is the role of parents in all of this? Because parents can often feel like they don't actually have a lot of influence or that they don't have a lot of control. So tell us about the brilliant book that you wrote with, what's her name?
Who?
What's
You.
her name?
Jenny Hassan.
So I want to get, first of all, I 100% agree with Janae's intervention, which is the catch, right, Nat? Which is we need to rethink the ways in which the system serves young people, because I don't think we're going to get out of the chronic absenteeism problem by just shoving kids back into school like we've been trying. And if you talk to any district leader, please tell me if I'm wrong, they are at their wits' end. Like you've tried a million things. And so we do absolutely need to rethink how the system catches kids and shift the system elements around so that they can better serve kids. But Nat's put on the table this question of the throw, which is what is parents' roles and what is the expectations we have of kids? And Nat, you said, this is become a taboo issue. And I would say it's not necessarily a taboo issue we've done 3 years of research around, Jenny and I, for our new book, The Disengaged Teen, which looks at parents, looks at kids, particularly in the adolescent years, around this question of disengagement. And I think the issue is that we have to be careful because of history. The U.S. has a long history of blaming parents, largely poor parents, largely parents of color, and it's a bad history. And so we don't want to repeat that. But that doesn't mean that we can't have the expectation that every kid should go to school. We absolutely need to have that expectation. And from all our discussions with parents, and this is really parents of adolescents, so I don't know, I'd be curious for you to fill in the gaps of the kids in pre-K who aren't going to school when it rains. But parents of adolescents, it's really having high expectations, but it's absolutely about tone. We've talked about this, Nat. You can't go around blaming parents. Every parent that we've talked to is like, I got it. Our teens need to be in school. You do not need to tell me my kid needs to be in school. They are not going. They're adolescents. What do you want me to do? So we know from years of research that really the only way to get to the solution is to bring the families in as partners. And to do that, you cannot go around, it's all about tone. Think about how you talk to your own kids if you really want them to partner with you on something. It's invitational language, it's sitting and listening, it's building that relational trust to say what's going on. This is the expectation, kids need to be in school, this is why it's good for them, we can talk through it. And I think that is absolutely what parents are waiting for, really. Did you want to add something about the book? Even though you're a moderator, you're a co-author.
Yeah.
What else would you pitch in on these questions of parents?
I was thinking about my next question, so now
Okay.
you've thrown me for a loop. I think there are a few things that strike me. I think we were shocked at the number of, really stepping back, we were really shocked at the number of kids who don't feel safe in school, who don't feel they belong in school, who don't feel capable in school, and don't feel that they will find a path to success in school. And so that is clearly like a school design problem. But we were also surprised at, between school design and parents, how easily it could be turned around. Not silver bullet, not in a day, but that this is a problem that we can solve, that parents have this incredible ability to help shape excitement around learning and an attitude towards learning and a mindset towards learning that can make a difference. We only have 5 minutes, so I actually do want to really get to the blue sky thinking, because I want everyone in this room to leave with sort of a few ideas that they can take away and say that this is what, if we had no obstacles, if we had no barriers in our way, if funding was no issue, what would you like to see happen? I want to start with you, Dr. Santelises. What would you like to see happen today to get more kids back in the classroom?
So, well, first, I do want to say we are getting more kids back in the classroom.
Well, fair point.
Right, so
even more.
Yeah,
even more.
No, and that is true. But I do think, to say it's just this intractable issue and we haven't made progress. Our chronic absentee rate went from 68% after the pandemic, right? And it's declined 20% in like 2 or 3 years. So to sit here and say, oh God, it's so intractable and we're not moving, I just want us to have our own sense of agency. And then one thing I would say from a district leader perspective, if we can think of time in schools differently, and what does it mean to have time in learning? So it's some of the work that Carnegie, full disclosure, was on the board when we started this, but this idea of what does the unit, how do we measure what learning time really looks like and where learning time occurs? Because that's some of the attractiveness of engagement, is being able to learn in different ways. We just had a snow day, mom confession. My kid, who was so excited not to have any school, was on a Zoom call for 3 hours prepping for mock trial. She was thrilled she didn't have to go to school. She let me know, as the school CEO, why she was thrilled she didn't have to be there. But somehow this kid, with 5 other kids, no adults on the call, is digging deeply into legislation, cases, case law, the whole 10 yards, because there was an activity that made sense and it was occurring not within some confined way. So if I had one big push, I'd say, can we think more flexibly about time and place and what constitutes like actual learning space?
Great. Nat?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, I'm not I'm a skunk at the garden party, so I'm not the biggest blue sky, but I will say that on one of these things that I am looking for to bring down the chronic absenteeism rates is our call for state leaders to make sure that this is a #1 priority. So we've put out this 50% challenge with Education Trust and Attendance Works. And that's where states are committing to cut their chronic absenteeism rates by 50% over 5 years. That would be to aspire to do a little bit better than before the pandemic. And I would call folks to pony up.
All right. Janae, we've got 2 minutes, so you and Rebecca are going to have to go fast.
Okay, cheating fast, two things. One, I would give parents a guide that are questions that are aligned to some of the questions that we found when we asked students about their experience. These questions are for parents. You can ask them at dinner, you can ask them in the morning, but there are questions that help you have deep conversations because they can't do anything that they don't know about, to your point, but then they got to know what to ask in order to learn. So that's thing one. Thing two is every school community across the country would have a school design team that can help them do the deep community-driven work to reimagine learning for their young people.
Perfect.
Wow, you're
Rebecca.
fast. Janae took mine, so I will come up with a new one.
I am so sorry.
Which is, so in our new book, we do have an entire parent toolkit for parents to help. No, it's great. I'm glad you took the point. To really help guide them on what they can do at home and how they can talk with their schools about their kids' disengagement. And there's a lot they can do. So my new one would be anything that actually cuts across all of these, anything that we can do at home as families or in the school building to promote student autonomy and agency. All the stories that we're told are because kids were given a little bit more autonomy, not keys to the whole kingdom, and you're going to design your own curriculum and you don't have to learn the Pythagorean theorem, which we heard from every single kid. They really don't like the Pythagorean theorem.
Or quadratic equations.
Anyways, just a little bit more of autonomy and agency to specifically try and apply their academic learning. I think anything that does that, I don't think there's one silver bullet, but that's what I would say we need to do.
All right, so we're reimagining time and place. We are putting state leaders under the gun, 50% challenge. I also love your chronic absenteeism calculator. It's very, very cool. Discussion, we actually have a line in our book, which I'm going to plug right here because I get the last word. Discussion is to adolescents what cuddles are to infants, necessary for brain development. So, and agency and relevance have just come screaming through this conversation. Students need more agency. They need to feel that they have a reason for being there. It needs to be more relevant, more tied to the real world. That construction example was powerful. The studios example was powerful. So we're going to wrap it up there, and we're going to do some Q&A. Can we first have a round of applause for our fabulous panel? I think we've got we've got a mic going around the room. Who has a question? Let's start back there in the green sweater, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Lainez. I work for the CPS. I am a high school teacher. I have 4 of my high school students here. And we have been discussing the topic on and off. And I like the fact that you talk about lots of stakeholders, like what does the field look like? Throw and catch. Who are the throwers? Who are the catchers? Are the catchers the students? Are we paying attention to them? What do we understand? We are in a different generation of history and human development. Are these students, wherever we are throwing to them, are their interest in catching, or they just letting go? Or are we pushing them away? So I think there are so many questions and very little answers, but I will say that one thing that we should go back here is to go and study these humans that we are throwing things to them, because they are the catchers. And what are we catching? I don't see here mentioning the stakeholder as a teacher. What are the teachers are doing? And the curriculum, what are the outcomes? What do we want them to walk away from high school? 28 credits in DC, 21 credits in other states in order to graduate, and how those credits look like? Are they owning those learning? Are they part of designing those outcomes that they want to work? I love the fact of you mentioned about South North Dakota. PBL, project-based learning, is one of the school designs out there. So there are so many loose points that somebody has to put it together and include the main catchers, okay, the students.
Thank you. Who else? Right here? And, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Scott Goldstein. I'm with Empower Ed. We're a DC-based teacher advocacy and retention organization. There's a few things we've been working on here that I know some of you have a lot of expertise on, including flexible schedules. You talk about the time and place of the day that allows student enrichment while giving more time back to teachers. Community schools, which Baltimore is an exemplar of in the country, but also kind of closing experience gaps, which you guys have talked a lot about. One thing we advocated for here last year that DC started to put into place is micro-grant program. So schools that do not have PTOs or outside funding can bring the same kind of rich experiences to students that other schools can, to give money directly to teachers who want to run really rich and enriching project-based learning, field trips, or other experiences. But I think with all of these things, one thing that gets in the way, I'm interested in hearing any reaction to it, is that the schools where, and this happened in the pandemic, we look at students who are really far behind in reading and math, and what we say is, you just need more time in reading and math. And that further disengages those students, even though it's critical for them to get that. And we put in place strategies like high-impact tutoring, but then they're missing out on some of the things that really are a hook for them to come to school, to have those real project-based learning experiences, to go and do the construction or real-life work, vocational education. So how do we manage the fact that we're not putting so much scrutiny on the students who are furthest behind, that we're actually disengaging those students further and not giving them rich experiences?
I'm going to give a lot of people an opportunity to answer that, but I'm going to go to Rebecca first because this came up in the book and I happen to know that.
And it's a great point. It's a recommendation in our report, which is out of care and love, parents, family members, caregivers, as well as schools, take away extracurriculars and enriched agentic learning experiences when kids start to struggle academically. So one example, but you see this across the board, art, music, dance, drama. Kids who get straight A's, this is a nationally representative survey in the US, 60% of them are in any type of enrichment arts program. Kids who are bringing home C's and D's, half of that, 30%, are involved in any arts enrichment. That's true for sports, it's true for coding, it's true for anything. And we know from all of our qualitative research, and actually tons of research on interests and student development, that when kids are involved in something they're interested in, they do way better in school. They show up, they get excited, it's energizing, they feel like they have an identity, it's something they're good at, and they feel a positive association. And so we were talking beforehand that this should be part of the campaign. Like, do not take away extracurriculars when kids struggle academically.
Okay, I actually want to push this to Dr. Santelises.
Yes.
Fine, but what about kids who are really misbehaving? How can we then reward them? That feels like exactly the wrong message.
Well, and I think some of it is attaching reward to things that should be essential components of learning, right?
I like
so
that.
we actually doubled down because of student recommendation on creating, frankly, doing what a lot of independent schools do, is actually building the club time in the school day, right? So it's not an extra, if you win the prize, you get to go, but what are other ways of doing that? And so what young people told us is actually having more flexible time for catch-up during the day. And even some of our, I would say, entrance criteria high schools, they found the same thing that some of our lower achieving schools found, and that is if you create days within the school year where young people have the morning or half a day to just go to the teachers that they need the extra help in the groups of 4, then they actually learn more and have more time to catch up. But that requires administration, and I'll put the blame on me. We've got to be able to look more creatively at scheduling, and this is what I mean about time and place. And we had so many aha moments from teachers and principals who were like, yeah, we always thought of that as extra time, but just having that one day a quarter where kids could make up work during the school day, still get to their job after, has kind of changed how young people feel about that. And this piece about having club opportunities during the day, I think sends the signal. And we actually used our ESSER and ARA dollars and our new Maryland dollars to double down on arts. So one of the things we knew is that young people coming from low socioeconomic backgrounds are less likely to have the instrumental music, to have the visual art. And so we doubled down with our community advocates. But I agree with you. I think there is a minimalist approach that is a deficit approach to young people who are behind, that is stripping them of everything, when all of the science and frankly, everything we know about youth development is that it actually needs to be increased. So I agree with you. I think that's a policy decision. I think it's a budget decision. And I think it is a willingness to disrupt, quote, how things have always gone.
Also known as a leadership challenge. That's a leadership issue. Yeah, Jeanette, jump in.
May I add to this, Dr.
Of course.
Smith?
Absolutely.
I love these points so much because it's all of those and it's a design question. Like what I'm hearing and what you did is you also designed how the school day felt, which is very real. Now let's apply that in a slightly different space. So that's, you know, if we are working on the 100-year-old schedule that we've been given. You've got reading, you've got math, you've got this, you got to get on grade level, you got to. But that's a choice. We could structure school in a slightly different way where you're not going in age-based cohorts, so you're off grade level if you didn't get an N on the thing. It could be you're grouped by ability level, and you're moving through your school day based on your ability, and you're unlocking and you're getting new opportunities. You might be flying in math, but you might really struggle in reading, and so you're going to experience school in a different way. You might be in a small group that is doing the advanced calculus, et cetera, in math, but you might really need some reading help. And instead of us saying you're behind in reading, it's like, this is your ability. This is where you are. You can grow. You can get better. So I just want to add to that in the long term, these are absolutely necessary things that we're doing here in design in the short run. And in the long run, we can be reimagining and rethinking the design of the thing so that we're not even operating from the beginning with that deficit-based approach, which is often helpful.
And this is happening, right? This is
happening.
There is a shift to competency-based education,
Yes.
to mastery-based learning, and the Carnegie, you know, what we're seeing is the Carnegie unit is being dismantled, and that is going to free up the opportunity to be more innovative about design, but it will require leadership, and it will require buy-in from parents who often resist these innovations because they don't know what's coming, and no one takes the time to explain it to them. So I think there'll be an important...
And if we're honest, because we botched them before.
Right,
true.
So
right.
like a lot of our parents are like, oh, you're not experimenting.
We're not doing that again.
That whole PBL thing, and now my kid can't read. So I think we have to be honest.
Yeah,
when
I love that point.
we have messed up.
And just to add one thing, there's a time dimension that you're referring to in the short run and in the long run, and we have to put the redesign. Blue sky thinking on a track that can go over a long-term period, but it takes a long time. And doing it quickly, Sonia, tell me if I'm wrong, is a good way to do it wrong. But there is a chronic absenteeism crisis. And so we do have to be clear-eyed about what we have to get done on what schedule and what that might mean for success.
This might not be right, but I think Singapore does 5-year plans on education, which is a really interesting way of thinking. 5-year development plans, which is what a lot of companies do. So this idea of just really thinking, yes, there's short-term priorities, got to get kids back to school, but there's also that sort of 5-year plan. There was a question in the back,
Yes.
please.
Thank you. My name is Javier Arguello. I'd like to, just to be provocative, challenge the premise that we have a problem with absenteeism. I think usually in the room, I hold the highest credentials. I was the valedictorian of absenteeism at my school, and the worst behaved student, as I was told, in the school's 200-year history. So I know what I'm talking about here. I think, just like you said, Rebecca, absenteeism is a symptom of disengagement. Absolutely true. Disengagement is a symptom of a broken system. And the broken system has 3 pillars. We have the incentives, the inputs, and the outputs. The incentives were designed over 100 years ago, which you alluded to, Janae, and you mentioned your work in North Cass with Dr. Corey Steiner, I believe. We work with him, and he's awesome. Yeah. I run an R&D in applied cognitive science. And my point here is that if the system does not create incentives that lead to learning, and if educators have never been afforded an opportunity to understand the science of how students learn, and if students are asked to learn but never taught explicitly how to learn, then we have a factory that keeps generating failure and disengagement. So if you're asking me to go back without changing the variables of the system, you're asking me to go back to increase my anxiety, my depression, and possibly my suicide, unless you fix the system. So I think the talk has to be system-wide rather than symptom-based, and I'd put engagement in the symptom category. Does that make sense, or is it too convoluted?
No, makes perfect sense.
Well, I just will tackle that. When you look at the nature of the change in chronic absenteeism over the past 4 years, it's pandemic related. It was a spike during the pandemic. So part of my argument that this is a change in behavior that's not system-based is that a lot of parents were sent a lot of messages, a lot of students were sent a lot of messages over the pandemic, that it's dangerous to come to school, and if you do, someone may die. That was the lesson. That will change your behavior. And our messages to come back to school have been somewhat less powerful. Right? So I don't think, which is probably appropriate, I understand that, but
not wrong.
The effects there are that I think we've changed behavior. And it's also certainly not the case that both things can't be true at the same time.
And you just said the thing that I was going to say.
Jumped right in front of
I do want to say that I agree that is a really nice reframing. I agree with it. And one of the reasons that Jenny and I wrote the book is to figure out to Nat's point about what's the short-term thing. What can parents do today? Mm-hmm. What can parents and teachers do today as system transformation is happening? I have a whole bunch of colleagues at the Center for Universal Education, and every single one of us, no matter what our work stream, is focused on system transformation. And it will take time. It will take time. This is a long-term prospect. And I do think there are particular shifts in behaviors that we can do today. I think there's lots of evidence that teachers can embrace autonomy supportive teaching practices regardless of what the school leader does in their classroom, without changing curriculum, without changing disciplinary procedures, processes. That does give kids a bit more autonomy and agency and actually boost their engagement and interest. And there's
academic achievement.
And
when you do that, the results
yes.
follow as well, which will then help with the engagement.
We would absolutely encourage folks to look at the work of John Marshall Reeve, who has tested this in the U.S. and across 13 other countries, randomized control trials comparing classroom to classroom within school, and it's quite impressive. And that doesn't seem to be out there. So there's one. Another one is what parents do at home, what caregivers and families do at home. There's a lot they can do, again, in shifting how they talk about school, less about what are your grades and more what did you learn.
Can I jump in on that, Rebecca? I love this point, and I will 100% support the system work, which is why we think so much about redesign and long-term. But one of the things I've also learned just in life is that the systems level work also needs on-the-ground short wins, because you can be running at a 100-year-old problem, a 150-year-old problem, and it's like, I'm tired, y'all. I need a win in September. And so I wouldn't want us to cut ourselves off from the idea that we've got to solve those long-term systems issues, but there are real kids right now, learning right now, who need to learn to read and they need to get in school, and we need to create those short wins too. And I think we actually can, and we see that we can do both. But I think systems change requires some of those short wins, and we've got to get them. And we're not going to get them if the kids aren't in school. We're not going to redesign anything if they're not even in school, and we don't know how to do that. So I respect that, and would just push to say that we hold both in that way.
And I will just want to back Sonia's play with a PSA that school is nice. It is great to go to school. I know lots of schools that are great places to go to every day, and I have faith that most American public schools are good places to go. So I want to make sure that we just make that nice and plain. We can talk about marginal improvements, but we don't want to come off as saying, well, it's just a factory and they're there working and it's drudgery, because that's not the case.
Yeah, and Dr. Corey Steiner at Northern Cass, one of his favorite lines is, school is fine. Our school wasn't broken, it wasn't the worst thing in the world, but it was fine. And our kids do deserve better than fine. And so I take that point. And fine is usually what a lot of young folks are getting.
I do love this theme of also just elevating the problem of let's get more people outside of education, outside of these storied halls of Brookings and everything. This needs to really be, like, we need to not be okay with these numbers. We need to not be okay with the fact, your LEAP studies, that kids don't like school. That needs to not be, well, it's teens. All teens hate school. Well, the consequences of teens not hating school is higher and worse than it's ever been. So we need them to care. And so I do think there's something really important about elevating this. I know in these circles, these are issues you guys are all grappling with, but I'm very struck at a national level how little we're making this a priority. And so I think that's just another issue. We probably have time for one last question. Okay. Who's my favorite child? This one. Sorry back there. Maybe afterwards.
People who advocate the book bannings, they invoke parental rights. Is it safe to presume that banning books is actually going to decrease people coming to school because they don't feel included? And do parental rights people have an answer to school absenteeism?
I love this question. Who wants to take it? I'm so glad I don't have to answer it.
Okay, so I guess because the superintendent always
Yeah,
has to.
I'm looking at you. I'm looking at you.
Yeah,
Crazy question.
no, well, and I mean because they're just hard.
They're
right?
hard, yeah.
I will say this, that I actually think that there is common ground.
Yes, I agree.
And I think that regardless of what people think about a particular series of books or anything else, this idea of developing a mobilization around having kids in school in meaningful ways engaged is something that across ideologies, aisles, everything else can occur. And I don't think this, God, it's a lovely space to be in, does not have to be polarizing. I mean, I think this piece about getting young people to school, I mean, it's why, like, if you look at the work Nat's been doing, he's been doing it across ideological spectrum because we do have, hopefully still, a core national consensus, I want to believe, that school is still something we desire in the promotion of our democracy, however broken it may feel at times. This country was founded on the idea that at some point, having more educated citizens is actually a good thing. And so I actually don't think this one, out of the many topics, has to be a partisan topic. And it's actually a way to bring people together, regardless of how you feel about, you know, whether you should be teaching Toni Morrison or William Shakespeare. You know, if you come to school, then we can actually read both and be okay. So I hear what you're saying, but I actually don't think this is a partisan issue, and I've never experienced it as a partisan issue. People disagree on some of the remedies, but I don't think this is one issue in education where there needs to be the kind of splintering that there are on others.
All right, we are going to wrap up. That was beautiful. That actually saved me from having to do a wrap up, which I'm very happy for. Yeah, over her. But thank you very much to everybody for being here. Thank you very much to our panelists. And we'll be mingling. We are going to sign books afterwards if anyone wants to come back.